As part of the new containment spec, container queries are here and they're absolutely amazing, but the @container rule is getting all the love. But there are a whole bunch of new container query units as well that I don't hear people talking about as much, and they're pretty exciting as well. Hello, my front-end friends. Thank you so much for coming to join me once again. And if you're new here, my name is Kevin, and here at my channel, I help you fall madly, deeply in love with CSS. And I think container query units are one of those ways that are gonna be something that solve problems, and that means we can be less frustrated with CSS if you're not fully in love with it. So let's jump in and take a look. This is an example. You might have already seen me working on this when I looked at the @container rule that you can see me using here. If you missed that video, I'd recommend that you check it out because some of what I cover here will be a little bit based on what I did in that video, though I'll try and explain things as much as possible in this one as well. And we're going to start with this super simple example that I have here at the top. And in this super simple example, right now we have these 3 divs. And actually, let's look at the HTML really fast first. So we have 3 divs like that, the container, and then the paragraph inside of it. So on my container, we're going to use a container type of inline size. And what this means is now anything that is inside a container that is nested in my super simple example, it can look at that for the width of that element to do different stuff with, whether it's an @container rule, or more, I think, fun is playing around a little bit with the font sizes. And so let's go down here where I have this selector for my paragraph in my any paragraph inside of super simple example. And you can see the color is being set here. So let's just change that over to a white color, and you can see it is influencing it. So this is working. And what we're going to do now is we're going to set a font size. And you might have already been setting font sizes with viewports, and we're going to compare how this works to the viewport one in a second. But what I'm going to say here is I'm going to give this a width of 5, container query, and we'll do W for width. And we're going to hit save. And you can see this one is much bigger, this one's medium, that one's much smaller, because this one's width is much bigger, medium, and smaller. And as these adapt, you'll see that only the bottom one is changing right now because only the width of its container is being modified. And then once those two lock up, then they're both going to change together. And then once we get to that last one, they all change together just like that. So really, really cool, really fun, and really easy to use, really. Now, before we move on to more exciting things, we have container query W for width. We also have container query I for inline size. And they'll look like they're doing the exact same thing. The only difference is width will always look at width, whereas inline size is looking at the inline size, like we said here when we said that we're looking at the inline size. So if ever the writing direction was actually something that turned vertical instead of horizontal, the inline size switches to follow that, whereas a width is always based on the width. So I'm, in general, always going to use the CQI or the container query inline size. Now, one thing that's really interesting when we use our container query units for sizing is that it's a little bit different from when we use an @container rule. Whereas if an @container does not find a container, it just nothing happens. A little bit like a media query, you have like a default styling. But if I take this container type off, it's actually going to pretty much turn into a viewport unit where it's just a viewport unit and it's based on the viewport. So it's no longer looking at this gray box or the parent that it was in. It's now looking at, something. So it is looking at the viewport to set the size of it. And if I put this inline size back, we also have ones for height, and we're going to look at them a little bit. But if I have the height would be H for height, or B for block size. So block is, we have inline left to right, block is the up and down. And in this case, it's more like a viewport height unit because the container right now is only set to inline size, so it's not paying attention to the height of these containers that we've set. So for now, I'm going to leave this as an I. We'll circle around to that in a bit more detail. But let's look at like a bit of a useful use case for them, which I'm going to go back to. I have these cards that I set up where different backgrounds, don't worry about it too much. But those are my call to actions right here. And my call to action has the headings that are in them. So what I'm actually going to do, let's say, and the call to action could potentially have different ones. We're going to say call to action. Inside of there, we can do our where H2 and H3. So say we're any heading level that might be inside of there. Let's just change the color to see if this works. Make it red, and you can see they're switching over. We have some down here that are also switching over. These ones are H2s, these ones are H3s. That's why I included both of them. What I'm going to do instead of changing the color is we can set the font size to using our container query units. And maybe we're going to do a 5 container query inline once again. And again, what's really important here is we do have defined containers. I've set those up in that previous video I was talking about. So if I come down, we have my content sidebar. So my content sidebar was here, and any direct children. So both, if I come down a little bit here, the content sidebar, I have the article, which is on the left, and then I have my sidebar here, my primary sidebar on the right. They're both being turned, they are both containers. So that is really important that I'm taking that step. And then here I can set my font size, hit save, and look, the font sizes are different, even though they both have the same font size declared on them, because these font sizes are relative to their parent. And here, now that we've shrunk down, they should actually be the same size. And down here we get these little ones because the same thing is happening there until they all stack over, and look how small they're getting. We're going to talk about that in a second too. They're not supposed to be doing this anymore. I must have broke something along the way. But you get the idea that it's following the size of its parent, which is super exciting and super cool. And it's going to solve a lot of problems where you might do something like setting here a font size of, say, 3 rem or something like that. And then you get these giant ones like that, or maybe, let's exaggerate it. So you get like overflow, like here, maybe it's perfect, but here there's the overflow or something, right? So like it just caused more problems than it was worth. Or you did it as a viewport unit even. So let's change this over to 5 viewport width. But now, we'll make it a bit bigger, 7 viewport width. And like here, okay, it's big, but it's okay. But over here, it's not working. It doesn't make sense in this context. And that's why container queries and their units are so cool, because they can look at the context of something, which is just awesome. But just like viewport units, where it's kind of awkward to use them and inaccessible in terms of viewport units, just do it like this, because if you zoom in and out, it doesn't actually influence the size of the font size. Container query units should be a little different on that front, but I'd still suggest using a clamp either way. So you set like a minimum, so let's say a minimum of 2.5 rem. Then we'll have our, say, the 5 looked a little small. Maybe we'll do like 10 container query inline, and maybe like a plus 0.5 rem, just to set like a baseline on there. Maybe that's just a holdover for me from viewport units, but I'm going to put it there. And then the biggest it can get to is 5 rem or something. And maybe on here we'll also throw a line height of 1.1 just to make it look a little better. And so again, same font size for both of these right here, but because we're using this container query inline, it's different in both situations. And then here it should actually be very, very similar. And then again, once it goes to the 2 columns, and it would max out at my 5 rem, smallest is here. So we stop that issue where on this side, it was just shrinking down to that like minuscule size. Same down here, we'll never hit that like too small of a size. But if it has more room, it will take advantage of that room it has, which is just so cool and so awesome. Now, not only do we have the inline and the block ones, but let's come up here, because this is a little bit where I experimented a bit with setting things up. So that's my hero area. So we'll find that in here. And the hero is the one place when I looked at the demo where instead of doing a container type of inline size, I set this to size. And what that means is the container is looking at both the width and the height rather than only the width. And that lets us be a little bit more friendly with the block ones. As you can see, it's causing some overflow, because when we do this, the height is we have to have a declared height. And my height here could be 80 VH. Let's not do a min height. Let's just say the height is 80 VH, which has its own issues. And you can see it's still causing overflow because of the image. So it doesn't really make a difference one way or the other, to be honest, in this case. So it's a little bit dangerous setting that, but we could fix that actually. Let's fix that now. Here's my hero image. And maybe I set the height here to be a 100 container query H or B. I'm going to do B to stick with the logical properties. Remember, B is block, so up and down. Let's hit save on that. And here, actually, let's just change this height to maybe an actual height. Aha, there we go. And now this image will adjust to the height of the container that it is inside of, because it's set to we have a declared height, and it couldn't be a min height. It had to be a declared height. So this could actually work. And then we get an image that can adjust to the size. And of course, we could do this with other things. So this might be a little weird because here we have the font size that is on here with viewport units. But what if I did this as a container query B for the block? And now the font size, let's make it a lot bigger maybe and just see. There we go. So the font size is actually being affected by the height now instead of the width. Now that's a little bit weird. I don't know if I'd want to live in that world, but it is an option that we have. Or we also have, just like viewport units, we have container query min and we have container query max. So the min means it's going to choose the smaller between. So right now my height is smaller than my width. And actually, let's take the clamp off of here so we can actually see this working. We're just going to do this as a 25 container query max. We'll start with. So it's actually, right now my width is bigger. So as my width shrinks, it's going to keep on shrinking. And then my width is smaller than my height. And you can, I think. So it's going that way. And then it's using the bigger of the two. So if my height is bigger, you can see the height is actually influencing the font size now as well. Or I could do that as a min, 25 min, and it's going to use the smaller. So if my height gets smaller, it's going to shrink down. Or let's make that bigger again and shrink it this way, and it's going to shrink with the width of it. In both cases, it's completely broken and we have overflow and there's other problems, but I did want to show we have the container query min and max. Probably won't use those too much. To be honest, I don't know even about the block ones because I don't think I'll be setting a lot of container type size. Most of the time, I think it'd be inline size, even though I've just started playing with these. If you can think of good use cases, please do leave a comment down below to let me know. But beyond that, there's another thing I'm really excited about, and we're going to come back to my call to actions here because I think this is these call to actions, because I think this is a really nice example of other places they could be used, is when we're dealing with padding and gaps. Because my padding here, what I could do is actually set this padding to be, we're going to do it kind of big, I think 10 container query inline. And that was a little bit too big, but because this has more space than this one, the padding on it is bigger. And as that space is shrinking down, you can see it's going smaller and smaller and smaller. And the other one is obviously matching it. But then once we run into these situations, or we could see it down here too, let's shrink this down. And this one has more room than these ones. So it's the same padding on both of them, but it's differing. Or we could do that with the gap as well. And you could adjust the gap between things based on the parent's size, which I think is really nice because you're not basing it on the viewport. Of course, this is too much. You could also use a min, a max, or a clamp. So you could limit the total sizes and prevent things from being way too big like it is in this example right here. But it's a nice example of how we can use them, not just for things like font sizes, but I think for padding, for margins, other stuff like that, where it's not based on the viewport, because so much stuff shouldn't be based on the viewport, and basing it on individual situations that things are landing in, it's really going to change the game in how we write our CSS and how we plan things out. And if you did miss last week's video and you'd like to check it out, it is right there. And if you missed the video before that where I looked at another new CSS feature that has pseudo class, which is another complete game changer, it is also right there for your viewing pleasure. And with that, I would really like to thank my enablers of awesome, Jan, Johnny, Mr. Dave, Patrick, Simon, Steven, and Tim, as well as all my other patrons for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.